Hello and welcome to A Bechdel Dysfunction, a podcast that dissects feminist films directed by men and discusses whether they are helpful or harmful. I'm Cara Strover.
And I'm Harry Anderson. We are two film school underachievers who are heaps good at talking about movies, but not that flash at making them. We want to acknowledge that we're recording this on Wurundjeri land. It would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We also extend that to any other First Nations people who may be listening today.
Today we're talking about the 2004 remake of The Stepford Wives, directed by the voice of Miss Piggy, Frank Oz, and starring Nicole Kidman. All the women around here are perfect sex kitten bimbos. All the men are drooling nerds. Doesn't that seem strange?
The Stepford Wives from 2004, directed by Frank Oz, written by Ira Levin, Paul Ruddick, starring Nicole Kidman, Bette Midler, Glenn Close, Christopher Walken, Matthew Broderick, and ya boy John Lovitz.
Even before we do anything else, I did not know John Lovitz was going to be in this, and I was so happy. I was like, yes. Surprise.
Finally, we got him.
Surprise Lovitz, yeah.
Yeah, it's the best kind of surprise.
Yeah.
After unjustly losing her job as a high-powered TV producer, Joanna Eberhardt and her family moved to the quaint little town of Stepford, Connecticut. But not everything is as it seems, as she discovers a sinister truth to the all-too-perfect behaviour of the other women residents. Hello, Cara. Welcome to the pod.
Thanks for having me.
No worries. You're welcome anytime. Wow. The remake. Back again after last week, talking about the seminal Stepford Wives film. Was this your first time watching the remake?
Yes, it was. And
How did you find it?
I watched it like kind of back to back. Like I watched it on a Tuesday night, I watched Stepford Wives, and then on the Wednesday night I watched Stepford Wives.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not wild about it. I will get into like, the nitty gritty of it all. But I feel like especially, and I feel it's a bit it's not unfair because it's a remake. You compare it by just inherently, especially watching it so close to the original. I was just kind of really put off by the tone, like some of the storytelling choices. Probably mainly I would say the tone was my biggest problem, because I think it just clashes so much with like the seriousness and sincerity of the original. This one just doesn't take the subject matter very seriously, and it's like, this is a serious subject. You know what I mean?
Well, I guess that's something to point out straight off the top is that, this remake is a comedy, whereas the previous one was a horror film. I'm personally was more familiar with this version because I saw this first. So I was like more accustomed to dealing with the text as a comedy. But it was a shock seeing the original as a horror. But I totally get what you're saying, because it's very much got that whole like glossy comedy look that a lot of films had at this time. It has a very similar look to something like Legally Blonde or Miss Congeniality, or even have we done another movie that's new lately?
It kind of looks a bit like it kind of looks a bit like Charlie's Angels. Like I don't know if this will like make sense, but it kind of looks like a magazine. Like it looks glossy. Which is not, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just it's a very sort of 2004 looking film. I also just think I don't think it's very funny. Parts of it. I'm just gonna have a little because I'm just gonna have a
off. Tease off.
I'm gonna have a little rant. This is gonna be like just to get it all out there. Just get it all. Yeah, I don't think it's like funny enough. I don't like that it's a comedy in the first place with like what it's dealing with, and if it is going to be a comedy, like it needs to be way blacker. Like the tone is just all over the place. I don't like that the three protagonists are they're too unlikable. Like we don't empathize with them in the same way as we do in the original. So I think like the impact of the ending is just not as strong. I don't like the fucking stupid change to the ending and to the reveal. Like the whole time they're built up, like it's obvious that they're meant to be robots, and then at the last minute, oh, they're not robots, they've just got microchips in their head and we can fix them. Fuck off with that. It's so like it's bad thematically, and it's also just bad storytelling, because that is not the story that you were building up to. This is obviously a last minute studio change, and it makes the rest of the movie not make sense. So I don't like that. We'll go into this a little bit deeper, but I have like issues with the Glenn Close character, but I've got like a little bit more. We'll get into that a bit like later in more depth, because I know you feel differently to I do about that. And just, yeah, like the comedy is some of it is so fucking tacky. And just like the confluence, what we said last week about the sci-fi element kind of being very like subtle. It's not the main part of the movie. It's only really in the sort of last like 15, 20 minutes, and it's nothing too showy. So it actually really saves the movie from being dated. Whereas this one has this fucking awful like 2004 CGI for these comedy bits that aren't funny. And it's just this confluence of like dated jokes, dated technology, for then also the joke doesn't make sense, because in the end, why is she an ATM? Why is there money coming out of her mouth if she's not a fucking robot?
Yeah, look, I understand where you're coming from. Hey, it's great to see you. Strong start, first of all. I understand. Yeah, if you're more associated with like the original text and the original film, like this is a really, really hard left turn and a bold decision to A, flip the genre, B, change the ending, C, just make it a lot more quippy and there's a lot changed. There's a lot of it's changed, but actually I like it. I actually like this movie. I think it's quite funny. I find the quippy back and forth quite funny between the characters, and I actually do find the characters empathetic. But it's very different, because I think a lot of the power dynamic has changed from the original, and I find the heightened reality okay. I mean, whether they should have made this in the first place or not is a big question. Like the motives of making this are questionable, to sort of deal with loved cult content, and out, known feminist content. It's a big move. But yeah, I have a few things about this movie that I really like. But I mean, we're kind of all over the place at the moment. But
maybe I came on too strong as well. There's stuff that I like about this as well. I think
that's okay. It's good that you feel passionate about it. I think. How about we start off by just talking through the plot of this film and how it's different from the plot of the 70s film.
Okay, so this film opens with Joanna Eberhoff. In this film, she's a TV executive for a sort of sleazy network. She mostly produces kind of quite prescient sort of relationship-based reality TV. Like, it was the sort of thing that I feel like in 2004 you could have said, we're going to make the most ridiculous show. And then in 2023, you're like, they actually have sort of shows like this now where you just marry people like without meeting them. So kind of a good insight into like the way that TV was going. And then a sort of male contestant who was hard done by one of her programs attempts to murder her, and also kills his ex-wife and her, what was it, like her 5 boyfriends or something.
Yeah. So
it's a great opening joke there. And the fallout of this is that she gets fired. Her husband, and this is Joanna Eberhoff, played by Nicole Kidman, and her husband in this movie played by Matthew Broderick, a sort of kind of classic sort of nice guy sort of actor, who is also a TV executive at the same network, and he quits in solidarity with her, and then suggests that they move to the suburban Connecticut, Stepford, after Joanna has a complete nervous breakdown, is I think how it's described. Mm-hmm. And then after that, it's pretty similar going to the original film, just noticing weird going on in Stepford with the way that the other women who live there kind of present and behave. She makes friends with Bette Midler as Bobby, and there's a gay character now. There's a gay couple in this film who also gets Stepfordized. And I think one of the differences that, this is what, sorry, I came on really strong with hating it. There are some things that I actually think were smart, and it kind of frustrates me a little bit, because it's like, you had something here. Because I think when you talked about like whether it's kind of right to remake it, I actually think it could be really good because, you know, the first one is set in like, you know, peak of the second wave, right? And it's talking about all these second wave concerns. So then it's kind of interesting to see like 30 years later, where is feminism now? Where are women now? So how does this story fit in that context? And you kind of see little glimpses of this, particularly in that, like, because I noticed it straight away. I was like, well, in the original, Joanna like has aspirations of becoming a professional photographer. In this movie, Nicole Kidman's at the height of her career. So already you see a huge change there, which is that, you know, the women characters in this movie are ones who have benefited from women's lib and have managed to have successful careers in the ways that women in the 70s didn't have that opportunity. So first of all, I'm like, that's a great change. And actually, you know what? I actually think that they extrapolate on that really well when it comes to the reveal, which we can sort of talk about a bit later. But that's probably one of the biggest differences for me is like when coming into Stepford, what positions those women are in like before the move. That's the most significant change, I think, in my opinion, other than the Glenn Close thing.
Yeah, and so obviously just carrying on with the plot there, this is a different ending
Sorry, I forgot.
compared to the original film. In this version, the women are not killed and replaced by robots. They effectively have a mind control device. And I guess the twist is that it wasn't the big bad evil Christopher Walken who was doing it all along. It was actually his wife. And it was her plan to sort of create this fantasy world, which in all honesty is something that I find most fascinating about this film. People who are dealing with grief, creating complex worlds as a form of avoidance to dealing with grief and growing, dealing with it head on and growing as people. I find that particularly interesting. I also find people ducking into subversion or ducking into a passive life after being a very successful life, because there's a lot of parallels between Nicole Kidman's character, who's a high-powered businesswoman, as is Glenn Close's character when she monologues at the end. They both have the same trajectory, and they both have an impulse in this film where they decide that they don't want to have this high-powered business life because it's not bringing them the happiness that they desired. It's not this idealized life, and they decide to follow a different idealized life, which is very passive and tradwife, as we would call it now, as social media trends would have it. So I find that stuff super interesting. I find films that deal with that very interesting, something like The Village by M. Night Shyamalan, or a lot of Lynch's work, which is more cerebral. So stuff like Mulholland Drive and Lost Highway, where these characters create these worlds to hide from their grief instead of dealing with it. Very interesting. So I find this movie very interesting and fascinating because of that. And I also think the character arcs in this film are better than the original, particularly with someone like Walter, who's played by Matthew Broderick, who is effectively radicalized by a far-right group and has the chance to atone for his mistakes. Whereas in the original film, it's all about what you see and what you don't see. So it's all from Joanna's perspective, whereas in this film, you see it from Matthew Broderick's perspective as well. So you're less in the dark in that sense. But yeah, and I'm okay with the tone. I think it's very of its time. I think tongue-in-cheek stuff was way more in than long, dark, and serious stuff. I think this film couldn't be a long, dark, and serious film until something like Batman Begins came out. Because like everything was camp and gooey at this time. Like James Bond is gooey. The Batman movies are gooey. It's a very like non-serious time for films. So it makes sense that it looks like this to me.
Okay. I will say I don't necessarily have a problem with the tone like on principle. I just don't think it's I don't like the execution.
Yeah. And I can understand that.
I think that there is a way, because I'm pretty sure like the original novel is meant to be like a sort of black comedy. I think there is a way to do this story as a black comedy. I just don't really think that I like the one-liners and stuff. I like Joanna talking to, I do like that stuff. Like maybe I came on too strong at the start.
I think you're fine.
No, but I'm just saying like there are parts of it that I like. It's just, for me, the whole is not there. It's picking little bits. And I will say, like, the Glenn Close stuff is interesting. And, you know, when you said about their trajectory, it's actually like a plot point of the film is that all the women in Stepford are were high-powered, successful women.
Mm-hmm.
And how Glenn Close has kind of facilitated this whole town to basically lure the insecure husbands of successful women in order to give them a more subservient wife. And again, like what I was saying before about when I think this movie can kind of hit the nail, like I actually think Matthew Broderick's little speech at the end. So there's a confrontation at the end, like similar to the original film, except where Joanna is at, you know, the scary house or whatever and finds out what they're going to do. And they have this confrontation, which is much more in depth than anything that happens in the original also, where Matthew Broderick it's basically like, you know, I went out and I got, you know, the kind of dream woman, like the successful, high-powered businesswoman, and it sucks. And I feel really inadequate in our relationship.
Yeah.
And like, I think that is a really insightful insight into a lot of like the backlash to feminism, especially like I would say still to like our time now. But I don't think there's enough. I don't think it's dug into deep enough. And I think that he kind of gets away with it too easily because it's still, to me, essentially projected onto her as like not being a good enough partner. And while that might be true, she also wasn't the one who was going to turn her partner into a robot. He was.
Yeah.
So it kind of, for me, is just like, okay, well, here's this thing. Like, can we dig into this a bit deeper? Can we make them like really fully flash this out? And they just kind of don't. It's just kind of like, hey, don't you know that it's really hard for me as a man when you're the man in our relationship? And she goes, yeah, you're right. It is hard for you that I'm the man in our relationship. Let's try and find a better balance. And then I find that a little bit too easy.
Yeah. I think it's quite clunky and very poorly delivered. I would agree. But
there's good bones. There's good bones. But I actually think that this movie, I don't really think that it does celebrate the sort of high-powered businesswoman. I think it sort of thinks that it does in a really shallow way.
Yeah, I guess it doesn't know what it wants, right?
No, because ultimately, like, you know, she's represented that opening scene of her like addressing the stakeholders and stuff. I think that that's meant to be taken as ironic. Like, I don't think we're supposed to think that she's like a good person or think that her success is good because she's creating sleaze, right? Like, we don't like her content and she's losing her values because she's just all about making money. Yeah. Like, that's kind of the read that I'm getting off it. And
And you see her like when she's like, oh, and we'll pay for all their stuff. We'll make sure they're all okay. And then we'll turn it into a special.
Yeah,
so she's
exactly.
still using their grief for her own benefit.
So I don't really think that her persona as like a businesswoman is represented in a very positive way. And it's the same, I would say, with the Bette Midler character because she's this kind of, I wouldn't even know if I would call her like a radical feminist, but just a sort of provocateur who writes books like about her mother called like, I hate you. I mean, I love you, but please die. And she has like one book about her husband where she's like going to cut his dick off. Like, she's not really represented as, I like her and I think she's funny, but I don't think she's presented as that much of like.
She's a bit of an Enid Wexler from.
A little. And I just, and in terms of like having its cake and eating its too, like the ending. So in the end of this movie, Walter, sort of 6 months after, they pretend that Joanna's been converted and then they sneak into a party and they like sabotage it and they break all the women's mind control and they get to come back. And I just like, it feels just kind of cheap.
Yeah, it does. It's very tacked on at the end. And I think they, in my research that I've done about this, I think initially they had the ending that was the same as the original film, but it tested very poorly in test audiences. So they went back and shot another ending, which again, I do think is interesting. But I think the whole Larry King thing at the end is very awkward and clunky and kind of lame. And all the men in the supermarket at the end is pretty poor as well. But I mean, yeah, like let's talk about this. Let's talk about the people who made this. So directed by Frank Oz, as we said, the voice of Yoda and Miss Piggy and Grover. Have you seen much of his work before?
No.
You want me to rattle off some titles from the big boy?
Please.
So Dark Crystal.
I've seen Dark Crystal, yeah.
Famous for the Muppets as well. So he's like one of the creative...
A puppet guy.
He's a big puppet guy. Little Shop of Horrors, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, Death at a Funeral, The Score. Like he's made some... He's a heavy hitter. He's like one of the all-time great filmmakers, really, across the board.
I've seen a few of those.
Yeah. So he can do dark comedy for sure. So like this could have very well been a Death at a Funeral sort of dark comedy kind of thing. And it probably would have been good, but... Yeah, I think he kind of got caught in trying to please the studio. This movie, like the original, was a flop financially. It made its money back, but I think the rule of thumb is you got to make double the amount of money you spend for it to be considered a success in Hollywood, and it definitely didn't do that. So I think he has quite a few regrets about not doing it his way, but I mean, that's how it is. And it was written by... obviously based off the novel by R11, as we discussed last week, but Paul Ruddick, who wrote Addams Family Values and the first two Sister Act movies.
Which I love.
Yeah. Mate, we're buddies with Ruddy. What can we say?
I'm kind of, because not Sister Act so much, but like Addams Family Values feels like you could write The Stepford Wives as a comedy.
Malibu Barbie.
Yeah, but that movie... Yeah, I'm kind of surprised. Like, I don't know. Like I said, there's parts of it that are funny. I feel like the least funny stuff to me is the kind of the physical comedy stuff and like the gags, like the ATM bit. The dialogue's all funny.
Yeah, it's super quippy and yeah.
I would say and like that scene with it's like they find the remote and they're like, like her boobs get bigger and all this kind of shit like that.
Yeah, it's very TV sitcom.
Yeah, and like the technology has, it's like it looks very aged, and it's also just not like that funny. And I think, and that would be an example of when I think it's like if you're going to go there, go there. It's kind of too, like it's not dark enough.
Yeah.
When you think about like what's really happening in that scene, which is like rape essentially, like at least I know there's kind of an argument that in a lot of ways it's darker because, well, I mean, I don't know, like in the first movie they kill their wives and then I mean, can you rape a robot? They have sex with the robots. In this movie, because of this change in the ending, that's rape. Like, I don't think that the implications of that change were really thought through.
I feel like they were just trying to patch it up. I don't think, that's what Frank Oz is kind of banging on about in terms of being subservient to Paramount, just to make a funny movie that I guess executives thought was going to be funny without really respecting the text.
And it's interesting that it didn't. I mean, the other thing you've got to appreciate as well is that this movie, in terms of its cast, is way more stacked than the original. Like,
oh, yeah. And I am so into the performances. I really have to admit that. Like, Glenn Close and Christopher Walken cranked up to 110 is fucking so good. I'm doing a little dance right now because that's how much I love it. Like when she's doing the Claire aerobics shit with like they're all pretending to be washing machines. I'm dying when Christopher Walken is screaming Zeus, 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 like in the robot fight, losing my mind. Funny.
I think also, like, I don't know if I've seen Glenn Close really in another like comedy role. So it's cool to see her like out of her element, but also doing this like hyper feminine housewife thing.
Yeah, I reckon she's a little bit like the Welcome Wagon lady. I reckon her character has come from the original.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But
yeah, not quite Statham.
But also, like, you've got, like, Nicole Kidman was pretty, like, height of star power. I was thinking at the same time she did that, like, remake of Bewitched, which I think also flopped.
Yeah. I actually think she's bringing the goods in this.
She's great. I love Nicole Kidman. I actually think she's, like, really talented and like she's a really interesting actress because I was really getting, especially in the opening scene, like that Nicole Kidman was giving like a lot of Tom Cruise energy. Like it really felt like this kind of like post-divorce, like, oh, I need to play a kind of like megalomaniac, like
Yeah,
just doing like especially at
the crisis management stuff when she gets fired and she's just like really overacting.
Yeah.
No, it's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
Like the start when she's doing that presentation and then the scene where she gets fired, I was like getting strong Tom Cruise vibes, which I don't know. I just thought that was kind of funny.
Yeah.
Just a little Nicole Kidman tangent. I think you kind of can first get into her with like her biggest, like, you know, Moulin Rouge, like most straightforward roles, which are probably not her greatest. But then she just keeps on making like interesting shit. Like
she's funny when she's neurotic as well. Like I can't think of any other movie where she's as neurotic as this, but like also her face when she gets fired, she like goes through like all these like weird different settings. It's kind of robotic. Like,
oh, but she can also do like scary neurotic as well, like in like Stoker or something. Like she's really great. We love Nicole Kidman.
Yeah.
An Aussie icon.
Yeah.
Watch Dead Calm. It's great.
No, Dead Calm. How fucking good. I'm insane for Zane. But yeah, and our boy John Lovitz.
And like Matthew Broderick also was like pretty big at this time. Bette Midler, like these are heavy hitters.
Yeah.
For it to then not do that well is, you know, it's telling.
Yeah, it's bizarre, but yeah. Okay, so you have mentioned that the CGI is a little bit clunky and the tone is a little bit clunky, but is there anything else that you think dates this, or is there anything else that you found to be particularly cringy about this film?
No, sorry, I don't have like a cringe. Maybe some of the jokes about the gay couple are a little, yeah, I don't know, but like pretty typical of the time and not super egregious. And I also think it's kind of like part of the story because it's like that's kind of how the husband feels about his partner. So yeah, I don't know, some of that maybe, but like I don't have anything of particular.
Yeah, it's definitely of its time. It's definitely Bush era US comedy for sure. But yeah, I do find Glenn Close's performance to be pretty strong, and I don't know, I the way that she delivers her lines with like that crazy energy, it's just like, well, aren't you sassy and a little bit sad? Like I found that to be very funny. How did you find Glenn Close in general?
Oh, her performance is amazing. Nothing would never, I don't think I'll ever have like a negative thing to say about a Glenn Close performance. I have some sort of hang-ups about the character. I thought what you were saying was really interesting actually about, because I hadn't read it this way when you were saying about characters like in grief or hardship sort of retreating into a fantasy world and trying to make that fantasy into a reality. Like that is an interesting way to look at it. That's not really what I was kind of focusing on.
Yeah, what did you get?
I just kind of, just in case it wasn't clear for anyone who, the misdirection in this film is the Christopher Walken character who kind of comes across as like the leader of the men's association who's masterminding the whole
Stepford community
Stepford
robot
process.
Takeover. Yeah.
But the reveal at the end is that he is actually a robot built by Glenn Close, who apparently was a brain surgeon who could also build robots. Anyway, so he's a robot based on her husband after she murdered him when he cheated on her with her much younger assistant. And her rationale behind this is kind of that, like, as a high-powered career woman, she neglected her marriage. And then he cheated on her, and then she killed him, and then she built a robot of him, and then she moved to Connecticut to create a community of, kind of perfect men and perfect women. That's kind of her rationale, right? Is like
an idealized delusion.
Yeah. A retreat and a retreat, right? So she's kind of pinpointing the cause of her unhappiness not on her husband cheating on her with a 21-year-old, that he's internalizing
it's a societal
that
issue in her mind. Yeah.
she's internalizing that into her own mind as being a consequence of her desire to be a high-powered career woman, and that's the actual source of her unhappiness. And as a lot of unhappy people will do, and as a lot of regressive and reactionary people will do, they will externalize their own sort of internal beliefs about their life onto society and say, well, all women must be unhappy in this situation, so I'm going to give them the opportunity to fix this by luring their husbands, by sort of playing on their feelings of inadequacy, lure them to Connecticut and convince them to brainwash their wives. And then I think there's also a little throwaway line about how eventually she was going to do it to the men as well to make them into like a perfect community. Now, I think that this is an interesting idea. And I think that it's, especially with what you were talking about, from that perspective, I do actually find it a lot more interesting, but that wasn't how I picked it up in the movie. So I appreciate that reading. I just kind of find that to me, it's a little bit too much like, oh, everybody already knows the twist behind Stepford Wives, so we'll have to come up with a new twist.
Absolutely, yeah. 100%.
There's that. And to me, I think it's kind of detrimental to the spirit or the message or the politics or whatever of the original film and the original concept. However, I also want to say, like, I think she's a really great representation of this type of conservative women who feel threatened by progressivism and feminism, but to an extent, like, also weirdly embody these values that they rail against. And, like, another really good fictional example, it would be Serena Joy, who's the wife in The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And like a real life inspiration would probably be like Phyllis Schlafly, who was a campaigner in the 70s against the Equal Rights Amendment in the US. And there was recently like a Cate Blanchett played her in a, what's it called? Like Miss US America or something, a miniseries. And also like Anita Bryant, who was an anti-gay rights activist in the 70s. And they're these really conservative women who make careers basically preaching, against progressive politics. And then it's like, and then once my campaign is done and women's rights are over and gay rights are over, I can finally go back to my family life, which is, kind of a like a disconnect that I don't think that they can make in their own brains.
Yeah.
And I think that the problem that I have with it in the context of this film is that like Phyllis Schlafly and Anita Bryant were very prominent public speakers against progressive politics, but they weren't the leaders and they weren't the masterminds and they weren't the systemic problem. And to me, there's just kind of something a little bit too insidious about the idea that, if the Glenn Close character hadn't gone crazy, then none of this would have happened. I just think it kind of takes away a little bit too much from what the original concept was trying to say. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it just it gets pretty pulpy, hey? That's, by the way, that's about like the extent of like serious things I have to say. So,
no, I think that's fine. I think we've both come through with some pretty good thinky brain stuff for a movie that's more or less lighthearted, and as you say, takes away from the power of the original text in a lot of ways. But nevertheless, it's time for Sexy Lamp. Sexy Lamp. Okay, so defining Sexy Lamp. If you can replace any character in your film with a sexy lamp and it will not make any difference to the plot, themes, or story, you are a hack. Cara, do you have a sexy lamp for the 2004 remake?
There's about 15. They're called the Stepford Wives.
Yeah.
Well, okay, hold on. Let's the Christopher Walken character. Because he's the only actual robot.
It's true.
So.
Well, that's pretty solid, actually. I mean, he does have a very large cummerbund on in the showdown
he's
scene.
He's also in a weird flip. He's there to, he's the beginning of Glenn Close creating her fantasy world. So, there's that element.
Yeah. I also think, leaning on what I said for last week's episode with like some of the guys at the Men's Association being kind of blank, mysterious and insidious, I think this time around a lot of the guys in the Men's Association are a little bit more cartoony and played up and are probably on the same level with like a lot of their wives as well, like to an effect of the film. But I'm almost game to give John Lovitz the sexy lamp. Just because of like he's kind of aimless, bizarre. He doesn't do that much. Like he's just kind of there. And I think the main thing that does it for me is like when we get that big exposition scene 2/3 into the film when we're explained about how the process of the microchips work. And they look up at a painting and it turns into a screen and then the screen turns back into a painting. John Lovitz goes, "It's a painting again."
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was the ticker for me, but it probably is Christopher Walken. But that line made me think that's some sexy lamp material.
Yeah.
It's like, a painting again.
Lovitz is like, as much as I enjoy seeing Lovitz, I think he's kind of miscast in this movie.
Yeah.
I just don't know. Or maybe it's not him. Maybe Bette Midler's cast in this movie. Like the Bette Midler and Lovitz together, I'm like, because I think the thing with
I don't mind it in the first scene where we meet them, but after that, there's not much going on, is there?
I don't know. I just think the thing with the original, I think the thing with the Joanna and Walter relationship in both movies does actually seem believable, and they both kind of have these scenes where you can kind of see like the bones of their relationship and like why they sort of love each other. I think like, again, like there are parts of this. I actually really like that scene. Like when he was, apart from the like really insidious nature of it all, of the fact that Matthew Broderick is sort of trying to manipulate her into being a housewife, like that scene where, he kind of says like why she loves him. It's like really sweet. Like,
yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, like, I don't mind their relationship actually. It's just like, I think it's fine that he feels insecure. It's obviously not fine that he like allows himself to become radicalized and like is a bee stick away from following through with what the rest of the guys do. There's a mature conversation in there somewhere that didn't get written where it's just like, this guy feels insecure, and it's not uncommon for people to feel insecure in relationships. And it's just like, even though it may look idealized and it's functional on the outside, like relationships require constant work, and there's a lot of back and forth and blah, 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 whatever. And he does get the chance, as I said, to like redeem himself. But he's also like really emotionally manipulative in that same scene. He's just like, well, I'm going to fucking leave you if you don't change.
Yeah.
Like, so I think there is a world where those scenes get written better and there is depth in it, but it's probably not in this style of comedy.
No, I think also, I mean, Des was touching on like a little question we did for last week's episode, but to me, it seems more obvious in this movie that Walter, like, well, not even more obvious, like that he was lured out there, like with the intent of I'm gonna go through the Stepford process.
I thought the opposite because I kind of felt like it might have been her idea to move away. Doesn't she say that in the hospital scene?
Yeah, I think it was, but I think that
because they have the whole reveal. They do have the reveal, but they do have the reveal where they show him, the cash reveal, and he has no idea about it. So he couldn't have known beforehand. So I'm kind of the belief that like he wanted to go out there because he had her best interest in mind, and then he became radicalized. Because otherwise that scene doesn't need to be there. If he knew all along.
That scene doesn't need to be there. I don't know.
I mean, the scene needs to be there for us as an audience to know, like, to have that. Like, that has to be told at some point that they are robots or they've been, microchipped in the brain. Like, we need that as an audience, but that only works as a scene if he doesn't know what the deal is. Otherwise, it's just like, why would he sit through that with any level of suspense whatsoever? So for me, he doesn't.
But I'm trying to remember, like, I feel like in the hospital scene when he goes to, like, tell her that they're moving and stuff, there's like this really ominous flash of lightning when they talk about moving that kind of made me think that they're trying to suggest that he's trying to get her out there. But like also it kind of doesn't matter because fundamentally it's like moving to the burbs in a movie like this is kind of shorthand for trying to domesticate my wife. Whether through Stepfordization or just through the normal way. Mm-hmm. So, like, either way, like, for her best interest, I think he also knows that it's ultimately his best interest.
Yeah. I think that is an element there, but I think there's way more compassion and empathy in this movie's version of Walter than the first.
Oh, sure, because he doesn't go through with it as well.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, no, I
actually kind of like that when she says at the end, like Larry King is like, "Oh, is everything perfect?" She's like, "No, but we're doing great." Like that's such an honest thing to say about a relationship. It's just like, yeah, we have shit that we got to work through, and it's just like we had to go through hell. Obviously, it's a heightened comedy hell, but like they were vulnerable to each other, and they did expose their like insecurities to each other, and they've come out the other side of it. Like in a better movie, it comes across with better writing, but that is a beautiful thing for two people to be able to say to each other.
Yeah, no, I liked. Yeah, again, things that I like about it. I like the confrontation more, like more to talk about that confrontation as well, where she says, where they're kind of describing like the Stepford wife being perfect, and she says like, can it say I love you and mean it? And I was like, I really felt that because that was the whole thing that I was thinking throughout the first movie is like these men don't care about relationships. They don't care. They don't love their wives. They don't want to be loved. They want a slave.
Yeah, I think that's
And
the
like,
turning point back for Broderick's character.
Yeah.
He's just like, oh shit. Oh.
So that's another thing that I think is a success of this movie is to like verbalize that and be like, don't you want love? Like, isn't that what this is supposed to be about? Like, aren't we supposed to be in love? And like in the original movie, the answer is no. But in this movie, it's like there's hope. It's like, no, there is love.
Yeah.
And, you know.
Like the original movie has a solid voice and it knows what it's trying to say. This one doesn't. And
this one does not, yeah.
But
isn't that so fucking crazy when it's like based off two existing IPs with really solid and then to just flounder in this way?
Yeah, I think it's the need and desire to want to make something new for the sake of making something new. And it just didn't work out. But you know what will work out? The Statham swap out. Boom. Each week, we each get to choose one character to be played by Jason Statham from the film that we're reviewing. Cara, who is your Statham swap out for this week?
I'm going with Roger Bannister.
Oh, I also had Roger.
Oh, no.
No, it's meant to be. It's meant to be. Like,
I want
how
him.
Fucking good would that be?
I want him playing against type. I want him at the end of the movie when Glenn Close snaps, going, "She's fabulous."
Yeah. Yes. Me too. My shrink says I need boundaries. Jerry, it's a bake sale, an actual bake sale. It's like some heavenly diorama at the Smithsonian in the Hall of Homemakers. Yeah, okay, that's a lock in. Jason Statham plays the gay best friend Roger Bannister.
He becomes a senator or something.
Well, which then makes that turn a lot scarier when you have Jason Statham as a robot Republican politician. It turns into some fucking Black Mirror shit real fast.
In sync. It's good every once in a while.
Yeah, we finally found our feet. So with every film that we review on this podcast, we grade it using these three criteria. 1, does it Fight Club? 2, does it Bechdel? And 3, does she make it? So for number 1, does it Fight Club? Which means, does this film have a reverse effect of what the filmmakers intended? So with something like Fight Club, which should have been a cut and dry story about mental health issues, made boys want to punch each other in the fucking head. Cara, does the 2004 remake of The Stepford Wives Fight Club, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it does. And basically the same sort of things I was saying for the last movie and just for the Stepford Wives concept in general. I think specific to this movie, I would say I do think that I know that we like them, but I do think that like the main 3 characters are easier to hate if you're a sort of more conservative person. Yeah. It's easier to be like, well, I can see why John Lovers would want to change Bette Midler in this circumstance.
Yeah, because they're less like serious, they're less earnest.
Yeah. So I think that it's and because the tone is less serious, you can kind of more jokingly go along with it. Like, oh, I'd love to Stepford my wife. Like, I think that's kind of maybe a bit of an issue. But like, yeah, I think there's always with any kind of satirical concept like this, unfortunately, a tendency to Fight Club, as we say. So yeah, it's definitely there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm the same. Yes. Following on from last week, does it Bechdel? Does it Bechdel? Can you think of a scene where it Bechdels? Yeah, I guess when she gets fired.
Yeah, it Bechdels. It's just not as serious. Like they just don't really have real conversations. Like
you don't have the empowering conversation.
Yeah, and also just most of the dialogue is just kind of like quips. When it comes to like the three friendship, like we don't get that kind of genuine sense of friendship as you get with the original, because it's pretty much just like just quipping back and forth. Like it's passes the Bechdel test, just like there's nothing particularly like impactful about it.
Is this the worst movie we've ever reviewed?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, well.
I think it's my least favorite so far.
But powered by the value of comparison. But I guess one thing that it has on the original is final grading criteria. Does she make it? And she does.
Well, they do. I'll caveat that though.
Mm-hmm.
She does also make it courtesy of Walter changing his mind. And then at the end also, it's him who does the sabotaging.
Yeah, but they do decide to work together. I think
yes.
That's the thing. Like, it happens off screen, but like, I mean, at least for, they decide to put aside their difference. And it's shit and it's like really one-dimensional, but like they do choose to improve and they work together, and like she sort of has that covert operation where she's like, yeah, I'm going to distract Christopher Walken in character of a robot to help everyone.
I think there is that, like, to me, it's sort of like, it's just kind of clearly like giving the Matthew Broderick character this like hero moment, which is, I think, a bit unnecessary.
Reductive, yeah.
Yeah. But then, the end of the movie, and then the end of the movie has like, I mean, the Larry King interview, which is just kind of like, where are they now?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, like they do make it.
So this is going to get more points than the original.
Yeah, well, I don't believe in a point system.
It's taken you 11 episodes to say that.
It's qualitative, not quantitative.
That's right. And it comes down to this final question. Cara, is this film helpful or harmful?
I'm actually going to whack it in the harmful category.
Whoa.
Just because I think it like damages the brand, like
yeah, that's a great way to put it.
I think it just kind of if this is the only Stepford Wives version that you've seen, you don't really understand like what the deal is.
Yeah.
So,
and I guess I didn't when I saw this for the first time as a preview tween.
No, I just mean that as like, I just
for
think
everyone. Yeah, my life's not a case study. I guess
if I was to say to someone, I think if you want to get an insight into like sort of feminist themes or this like the struggles of a certain subset of women, you should try the Stepford Wives, and they watch this movie, they'd be like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
So,
why are you being an idiot?
So yeah, and I think because it's a remake, you can't kind of put it in isolation. I think you do have to like consider it in those terms. So yeah, I think for me, it's actually kind of harmful.
Yeah. Well, I'm inclined to believe you. It's just such a bold choice to do. Ira Levin, who'd written the novel, had died by the time this came out. I can't imagine he would have enjoyed it. Would you agree?
I don't know, man.
Yeah. Can't get in Ira's head.
What do men want? I don't know.
Yeah. I think this
sorry, yeah, I just watched
you get a bit of an insight into what some men want from both of these movies. But yeah, gee, we're crawling to the finish line today. It's really interesting. So let's get a little bit meta for a second, where it's just like I've watched both these films in the last 24 hours. And it's a huge spin out. And I would also like to say in between, I have also watched the Al Pacino, Michael Mann, Robert De Niro film Heat.
That's what he said to me.
And my brain is fucked.
That's what he said to me when we were out yesterday. We're doing the podcast tomorrow. I was going to watch Stepford Wives, but I watched Heat instead.
Yeah. Full disclosure, we recorded these episodes back to back. So last week's episode we just recorded, and we're recording this one, and we're really tired, and this one's not as good as the original. But by God, we've analysed it for you, and we hope you've enjoyed it in some way, shape or form. Well, that just about does it for another episode of A Bechdel Dysfunction. podcast that dissects feminist films directed by men and discusses whether they are helpful or harmful. Thanks so much for joining us, and be sure to tune in next week for another installment.